look at, a lot of us, really consider, okay, money is sort of the technological tool that they use to kind of create, debt and kind of create the serfdom, right? And you look at, the Purple Party bipartisan agreement on who gets to run the Federal Reserve. And if you go back to Volcker in the 70s, who was really kind of the king of interest rate manipulation, and you go all the way up into current times now with Jerome Powell, for these 50 years, every single Fed chair has been nominated by one political party and renominated by another. Every single one except Yellen, who was in there for only one term, who's now back as the Treasury Secretary. But every single one was nominated by one party and then renominated by the other, sometimes multiple times back and forth over Bush and Clinton, with like Greenspan and Bernanke. Like this is a clear cut case where we can see, this is something that the economy is always a pivotal, talking point in incumbent versus opposition of political parties. And yet, pretty much every single time since the mid 70s, there's been an agreement on who should run the Fed, even when there's a power regime change. So again, there's so much of this rhetoric is just face value, and just flap iterated systems. We can build dollar instruments that don't touch the Treasury system at all, don't perpetuate this Ponzi that really backs the US military and the dollarization of the world. We can create new systems using Bitcoin. And I really think that's where we should focus. But definitely want to let Whitney go off about other things. But I think really specifically, Bitcoiners should reject this notion, even though it's going to make us a bunch of money and ETFs and Bitcoin to $1 million and all this stuff. There's a real disconnect between the dollar's going to fail in 3 weeks and Bitcoin's going to $1 million. Hey, check out my implementation of Tether in my new wallet that I just built, right? It kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think we need to push back against that. Again, I think there are good people that work at these companies that are building these things. There are good people that work at Lightning Labs and Blockstream, and these people working on basically creating dollar tokens that live on Bitcoin. There are good people that work there, but the outcome is what's important, not the intention. And I think the outcome is the dollarization of Bitcoin and a prevention of it being this censorship-resistant currency that we can all use. And I think we're getting basically led there via this promise of riches. And I think that's
and not just to target him, but I do always target him. I've seen someone who's changed and who I think has become co-opted by like one wing of American politics, and I can see that pull people in, and I've got in trouble over this last week. I don't know if you saw it, Whitney, but Mark probably saw it. Where I was the same about Tucker Carlson. I was perfectly aware that this is somebody who only became anti-establishment really at the point where he was fired by Fox News. His father is a lobbyist for Viktor Orban. He himself is a lobbyist. I mean, his stunt in Canada was paid for by special interest groups, and yet there are people champion right now the downfall of the mainstream media because his interview had 150 million views and it's completely independent. But it isn't completely independent. It is still subject to the same misaligned incentives, and I worry that people think this new independent media is suddenly their source of truth when it isn't always a source of truth.
Yeah. Now, the fact that some figures on Twitter have called for sanctioning or other measures to be taken against Tucker Carlson for interviewing Putin, Tucker has sort of become the press freedom story of the month, as it were, as opposed to Assange's final extradition hearing. I think that's an interesting thing to note. And also, I think it's kind of odd that there was so much attention given to the fact that he was interviewing Putin. In the past, mainstream media figures have interviewed Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, and like all of these, U.S. adversary baddies. It's not something unusual, or it didn't used to be, maybe in the current state, but I don't really know how much of this rhetoric I necessarily buy as authentic, because, I'm paying attention right now in particular to this, what I would say is a manufactured effort to sort of, this phase shift, as Mark call it, sort of move the rhetoric from one side to the other, and sort of develop these figures that are trusted by the people, but ultimately, if they're not being used now, will be used in the future to sell you the same stuff at the end of the day. So I think it's important for people to be wary of independent media. Just because it's not on a mainstream media channel doesn't really mean it's truly independent. Funding of journalists and thing, but very often they don't do what they say they're going to do, and then you end up in this sort of loop of voting for the lesser of two evils. And if you oppose that guy, you must support the other guy. Sort of this binary thinking that people have been led into. And I think, again, because it's an election year, those parts of our brains are being triggered, and I think people need to resist that. And be reminded of how things were last time Trump was in office, for example, and how really the oligarch class in the United States controls both sides of the political aisle. And we should be paying attention to what the bipartisan consensus is about these things, because that's likely what's to be enacted. And we have to focus on, what those things are and how to resist them when they are a major threat to, individual sovereignty and liberty, and specifically financial privacy and freedom.
Thank you, Whitney. Mark, I'm conscious we're probably drawing to a close here. Is there anything you want to finish off with, add on to this?
Yeah, a couple of things just right off the bat there. I think Whitney kind of finished on this left-right paradigm thing, and I think it was really interesting. I was, I lived, still do, but lived in the Bay Area in California during COVID, basically. And I was pretty anti-lockdown and the TikTok guys, right? And they're coming out doing these very TikTokable talking points and quotes where he's ripping off, departments of his government that he wants to privatize and yelling afuera, afuera. And he's got his chainsaw and calling the liberals parasitos. And, he's basically the president from Idiocracy, just instead of a machine gun, he's got a chainsaw. And so the medium that they use basically to manipulate consent and to push certain rhetoric is also the same mechanism and framework that they themselves are also stuck in and they have to operate in. So I think by being aware of the medium that's being used to basically for these operations to be enacted, we can kind of push back in their own frameworks. So that's why I think it's really important for independent media to basically understand sourcing, understand how rhetoric versus action works, and how manufacturing consent works. And we can basically use the same tools that are basically used to try to enslave us in ideas to push back against those very ideas. So we actually have a lot of power right now with the internet being relatively open, create sustainable, immutable data points, and so that people can refer back to them. And the past can't be as manipulated, because as we know, Orwell's dictum, who controls the past controls the future. So if we can really remember the past together and work together in our own specific fields to really put this picture out there of this this coalition that's working against the freedom of the human race, we'll have a much easier time getting people on our side. And that's really what they fear is a true populist uprising. So they're inverting and co-opting populist uprisings. That's what they do. Mm-hmm. That's what they did with the Dalai Lama being a paid CIA asset. That's what they did with the hippies in San Francisco in the late 60s and co-opting it into this CIA MK Ultra thing. Like, it always starts with a real, true human revolution that then gets co-opted. And I think Bitcoin is not any different. And we have to just be very careful about the co-option of Bitcoin and the true freedom and self-sovereignty movement that was birthed with Bitcoin and with the community, and make sure that doesn't get lost.
Thank you. That was brilliant, Mark. What a brilliant way to end it. Do you have any closing comments, Whitney?
No, I would definitely just definitely support what Mark said. People just need to be really aware of, there's efforts to manipulate